listening, keep learning. The Tom Daniel Show. Keep listening, keep learning. The Tom Daniel Show.
You're listening to The Tom Daniel Show, and I'm your host, Tom Daniel. In this episode of The Tom Daniel Show, I will be fulfilling a request I read on the air in my mailbag episode a few weeks back. So, there's this little song, and you already know it. You probably learned it before you learned long division.
Lizzie Borden took an axe, gave her mother 40 whacks. When she saw what she had done, gave her mother 41.
Wow, we couldn't find 3 kids that could sing together. Whatever. Anyway, it's still catchy, right? Rhythmic, sticks in your head like a Florida sand spur on your sock. There's just one problem with it. It's wrong. I mean, almost completely, top to bottom, factually wrong. It wasn't an axe. It was a hatchet. Yeah, I realize that a hatchet is just a baby axe, but still. And Abby Borden was not her mother. She was her stepmother, and not a particularly warm one at that. The blow count is pure fiction. Abby was struck 18 times. Andrew was struck 11. I mean, nobody got 40 anything. And here's the biggest one. Do you know if Lizzie Borden was ever convicted? She was not. Lizzie Borden was found not guilty by a jury of 12 men after only 90 minutes of deliberation. 90 minutes! That's shorter than most movies and barely enough time to eat a sit-down lunch. So we have a rhyme that gets the weapon wrong, the victim relationship wrong, the numbers wrong, and the verdict wrong. And yet, for more than 130 years, that little rhyme has been the thing that everybody knows about Lizzie Borden. It ate the actual story alive. Now, I've talked on this show before about how a piece of culture can completely swallow the truth underneath it. I mean, we did it with Yankee Doodle, a song loaded with insults that got flipped into a battle cry. And we did it with Home on the Range, written by a miserable doctor trying to talk himself into liking Kansas. A culture has a way of replacing facts with a much more satisfying story. And this rhyme about Lizzie Borden is a perfect example of that. But today, I want to go one step further. Because when you actually ask why that rhyme even exists, why everyone assumed she did it, why the jury said she didn't, and why the town never forgave her afterward, you land on something that's a lot more interesting than a hatchet and a body count. You land on a set of assumptions so deeply baked into Victorian America that they worked in Lizzie Borden's favor in the courtroom and then turned around and bit her in the butt and made the rest of her life absolutely miserable. And I have a personal reason to be interested in all this, but I'll get to that later. So let's start with the morning of August 4th, 1892. The Borden house at 92 2nd Street in Fall River, Massachusetts was not a happy home. Andrew Borden was one of the wealthiest men in town, a self-made banker and real estate investor who, despite his considerable fortune, was tight. He refused to install indoor plumbing or move his family somewhere nicer. The house was cramped, hot in summer, and the relationships inside were strained. Lizzie and her older sister Emma had a cool relationship with their stepmother Abby at best. At worst, they barely spoke. On that August morning, Andrew had gone out to do his usual rounds and returned home around 10:45. He laid down on the parlor sofa for a little nap. Sometime after 11, the family maid, a young Irish immigrant named Bridget Sullivan, whom the family called Maggie, heard Lizzie call out from downstairs, come down quick. Father's dead. Someone came in and killed him." Andrew Borden had been struck 11 times with a hatchet while he slept. His face was nearly unrecognizable. Abby was found upstairs, struck 18 times. The medical examiner determined that she died nearly an hour before Andrew, meaning that whoever did this had stayed in that house for the better part of an hour between the two murders. The only people at home that morning were Lizzie and Bridget. Now, suspicion fell on Lizzie almost immediately. She tried to purchase prussic acid, a poison, from a pharmacist the day before, and he refused to sell it to her. She gave inconsistent statements to police, and a few days after the murders, she burned a dress in the kitchen stove, telling her sister it was stained with paint. A handleless hatchet was found in the basement. Investigators thought it looked suspiciously clean, and they arrested her 8 days after the murders. The trial began the following June and gripped the entire nation. And on June 20th, 1893, the jury came back in only 90 minutes. Not guilty. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Why? What happened in that courtroom? Now, the prosecution's case was entirely circumstantial. There were no witnesses who saw anything. No murder weapon was definitively identified. No blood was found on Lizzie, which seemed kind of impossible given the violence of the attacks, though some experts argued that it wasn't. The judges actually ruled that Lizzie's inquest testimony, where she'd been inconsistent, was inadmissible, and that was a significant blow to the prosecution. But there's something else going on in that courtroom that the evidence alone doesn't explain. And it has everything to do with who Lizzie Borden was, or rather, what she represented. Lizzie Borden was a 32-year-old unmarried woman from a prominent family. She taught Sunday school. She was active in her church. She was a member of the Women's Christian Temperance Union. She was, by every outward measure, exactly what Victorian New England considered a respectable woman to be. And in 1893, a respectable woman simply could not have taken a hatchet to her father and stepmother. That wasn't just the jury's gut feeling. That was a deeply held cultural conviction. The Victorian ideal of a woman was built on what they called the angel of a house. The idea that women were naturally more moral, more gentle, more civilized than men. Women were the guardians of the home, the keepers of virtue. They were, by their very nature, incapable of savage violence. So when 12 men sat in that jury box and looked at Lizzie Borden, composed, well-dressed, church-going Lizzie Borden, they couldn't make the evidence fit the image. Their entire framework for understanding women told them that was impossible. And when you can't make the evidence fit, you must acquit. The defense knew exactly what they were doing. They leaned into it at every turn. They made sure the jury saw a grieving daughter, not a suspect. They made sure her composure read as dignity, not coldness. They made sure her gender and her class did the work that the facts alone couldn't do, and it worked. Now here's the twist. The very same set of assumptions that walked Lizzie Borden out of that courtroom a free woman became the instrument of her punishment for the next 34 years. Because if a respectable Victorian woman was, by definition, incapable of savage violence, then what were people supposed to do with the fact that most of them still believed she really did it? They couldn't reconcile it. So instead of resolving the contradiction, Fall River just never forgave her. You're listening to The Tom Daniels Show. We'll be right back.
What are you waiting for? The Tom Daniels Show. What are you waiting for?
Well, welcome back to the Tom Daniels Show. And, I got to say, only Mary Mac could turn the show's theme song into something that sounds like it belongs in a Victorian parlor. Also, is there anything creepier than chanting children's voices? Good grief. Mary Mac is the world's most perfect band. Now, before I pick back up where I left off, I want to mention something that makes this particular episode a little timely. Ryan Murphy, the man behind some of Netflix's most talked about series, is currently in production on season 4 of his anthology series Monsters. And the subject is Lizzie Borden. If you've seen the previous seasons, then you know how Murphy works. He took Jeffrey Dahmer, the Menendez brothers, and Ed Gein and turned them into cultural events. Now he's coming for Fall River. Ella Beatty plays Lizzie. Charlie Hunnam, who was Ed Gein last season, comes back as Andrew Borden. Rebecca Hall plays Abby. It's expected to drop sometime in the fall of 2026. Notably, Lizzie Borden will be the first historical figure featured on that series who was actually acquitted. So if you're listening to this episode before that series arrives, good. You'll be ahead of the conversation. You'll already know what the rhyme gets wrong, what the trial was actually about, and what really happened to Lizzie Borden after the verdict. Consider this your homework. Now, back to Fall River. So Lizzie walks out of that courthouse on June 20th, 1893, free woman, acquitted, case closed, legally speaking. She and her sister Emma went back to Fall River, and here's the decision that's fascinated people ever since. She stayed there. Now, she could have gone anywhere. She had money. Her father had left a substantial estate, and she could have moved to Boston or New York or practically anywhere that didn't know her face. Instead, she bought a fine 14-room house on the good side of town, the fashionable Hill neighborhood away from the cramped house on 2nd Street where it all happened. She named her new house Maplecroft. She started calling herself Lizbeth instead of Lizzie, as if a single letter could create some distance between her and the rhyme. It didn't work. Her friends disappeared. People refused to sit next to her at church. Children mocked her in the street. Shopkeepers were cold. In 1897, she was accused of shoplifting in Providence, a charge that was quietly dropped but loudly gossiped about. The town had made up its mind, and no verdict was going to change it. She eventually found some happiness, or at least some warmth, through the theater. She loved plays, loved attending performances in Boston and New York, and around 1904 she met an actress named Nance O'Neill, who was celebrated enough that critics called her the American Bernhardt. Nance didn't judge Lizzie. Nance's crowd didn't judge Lizzie. And for the first time in years, Lizzie threw open the doors of Maplecroft and had actual parties with actual people who seemed to enjoy being there. And that's when she lost her sister. Now, Emma had stood by Lizzie through the arrest, through the trial, through all of it. But the parties at Maplecroft, the actresses, the late nights, that whole atmosphere were just too much for her. In 1905, Emma packed her things and left. She later told a Boston newspaper only that conditions had become absolutely unbearable in that house. She never explained any further. The two sisters never spoke again. After that, Lizzie retreated. She fed birds and squirrels in her backyard. She gave anonymously to animal welfare causes around Fall River, the very town that had turned its back on her. She took long drives in a chauffeured car rather than be seen on the street. She lived alone in Maplecroft for nearly 20 years. Lizzie Borden died on June 1st, 1927. She was 66 years old. Her estranged sister Emma died 9 days later. They're buried side by side in Oak Grove Cemetery in Fall River, reunited in death in a way they hadn't been in life for more than 2 decades. And here's the part of this story that hits me a little differently than it might hit everyone else. You see, Lizzie Borden is my 9th cousin, 3 times removed. I know, stay with me here. My maternal grandmother was Alice Ruth Lawson, known as Big Mama to her grandchildren. And if you follow her line back far enough, 11 generations across an ocean, all the way to Northampton, England, you arrive at a woman named Ellen Makerness. She is my 11th great-grandmother. She's also, if you follow a completely different branch of descendants forward through colonial New England and into 19th century Massachusetts, the 8th great-grandmother of Lizzie Borden. Ellen Makerness is the common ancestor I share with Lizzie Borden. 11 generations. An English woman who almost certainly never left Northampton. No idea that one thread of her family would eventually wind its way to a redheaded guitar picker in Alabama, and another would wind its way into the most sensational murder trial of the most famous redhead of the Victorian era. Now, that's the thing about tangled roots. You don't get to choose who's on your family tree. You just get to find them. And I'll be honest with you, finding Lizzie Borden on my family tree made me look at her story a little differently. Not because I feel like any kind of personal responsibility for what may or may not have happened in that house on 2nd Street. No, 11 generations is a long way. But because when someone is family, even that distantly, you find yourself looking past the rhyme, past the hatchet, past the headlines, and you start to see a real person in there. A woman who lost her mother when she was only 2 years old, who grew up in a tense household under a stepmother she never warmed to, who was tried for murder in front of the entire nation and acquitted, and then spent the rest of her life being punished for it anyway, who stayed in the town that rejected her, fed birds in her backyard, gave money quietly to causes nobody would thank her for, and died alone in a house she'd named after a tree. The jury said innocent in 90 minutes. Fall River took 34 years and never got there. And that rhyme, that catchy, wrong, immortal little rhyme, is still the thing most people reach for when her name comes up. It tells you nothing true about what happened, but it tells you everything about how the story got away from the person that it was actually about. Maybe that's the real lesson in all of this, not whether Lizzie Borden did it. Historians can argue about that until the end of time, and they probably will. The more interesting question is what we do with people once we've made up our minds about them. How a verdict can free someone legally and still convict them culturally at the exact same moment using the exact same set of assumptions. So here's the question that should be burning in your mind right now. Straight up, did Lizzie Borden really do it? The prevailing consensus among historians and investigators is that Lizzie Borden most likely did murder her father and stepmother. The case against her is substantial, but it's also overwhelmingly circumstantial. Only Lizzie had any clear opportunity to commit both murders. There was no one else in the house, and witnesses saw no one else enter or leave. There were no signs of forced entry, and nothing was stolen. The most widely cited motive is financial resentment. But in 1893, respectable women didn't commit murder, so the jury let her go. And then the town of Fall River spent 34 years making sure she still paid for it anyway, because respectable women didn't commit murder, and they're pretty sure she did. Same idea, two completely opposite outcomes. One for the courtroom, one for the rest of her life. And Ellen Makerness of Northampton, England, couldn't have imagined any of it. Neither could I, honestly, until I found it in my own family tree. Thank you, everybody. This has been the Tom Daniels Show. Keep listening. Keep learning.
Keep listening, keep learning. The Tom Daniels Show. Keep listening, keep learning. The Tom Daniels Show. from your usual routine and tune in to the Tom Daniel Show. You'll discover the world of melodies and stories that you might not know. Keep listening, keep learning. The Tom Daniel